Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been working as a senior editor at this publishing house for over 13 years. The job has its ups and downs, but I genuinely love what I do. Things were going smoothly until the company hired 2 new junior editors about 6 months ago. From day one, these two were different. At first, I tried to be welcoming. I offered to help them learn our style guide and showed them around the office. But it quickly became apparent they weren't interested in my mentorship. Instead, they started undermining my work, accidentally deleting my edits on shared documents, and missing deadlines that affected my projects. When my co-worker approached me, she told me she had noticed the two going through my desk drawers the previous day during lunch. I asked her if she was sure, and she confirmed that she had seen them herself. She explained that they were trying to be sneaky about it, but they were definitely snooping around my cubicle. This wasn't the first time I'd heard about their suspicious behavior. Other colleagues had mentioned seeing them lurking around my workspace when I wasn't there. But now I had confirmation. These 2 junior editors were dating each other. The first one was incredibly possessive and would constantly check the other's phone when he thought no one was looking. I'd seen him throw little tantrums in the break room when his boyfriend would talk to other male colleagues. That's when I hatched my plan. I called up a local florist and ordered the most hideous bouquet of purple flowers I could find. We're talking the kind of arrangement that looks like someone grabbed random flowers from a dumpster and spray painted them purple. I had it delivered to the office with a very special note. The next day I called in sick, but my loyal co-worker kept me updated on everything via text. She messaged me excitedly, telling me I wouldn't believe what was happening as the flowers had just arrived. I asked her to tell me everything. She described how the jealous one was losing it, demanding to know who Lawrence was. She watched as the jealous editor confronted his boyfriend, asking him about who Lawrence was and why he was sending flowers. He demanded to know when they had met last night. His boyfriend kept insisting he didn't know any Lawrence, but the jealous one wouldn't let up. He kept questioning why the flowers were purple, asking if purple was their special thing together. My co-worker told me how the jealous editor then stormed over to their colleague's desk, demanding to know if she knew anything about Lawrence or if his boyfriend had ever mentioned anyone by that name. The colleague immediately made an excuse about needing to use the restroom and fled the scene. Then my co-worker updated me about how the jealous editor was calling the flower shop, screaming at them to reveal who sent the flowers. The flower shop employee had to repeatedly explain that they couldn't disclose customer information. This went on for days. The jealous one kept checking his boyfriend's phone, email, and social media. He even started interrogating random people named Lawrence in the office building. Meanwhile, their colleague, who sat next to them, kept running to the bathroom every time the argument started up again. My co-worker sent me a photo of the bouquet. It was even uglier than I had imagined. A jumbled mess of poorly dyed purple carnations and wilted roses. Perfect. By the end of the week, the jealous editor had worked himself up so much that he actually quit his job. He couldn't handle working in the same office as his boyfriend anymore, convinced that Lawrence must be someone there. His boyfriend transferred to a different department shortly after. My desk has remained untouched ever since. Sometimes when I'm having a rough day, I look at that photo of the hideous purple bouquet on my phone and smile. Best $50 I've ever spent. To this day, nobody knows it was me. Well, except for my daughter, who I taught that sometimes the best way to handle office politics is to let toxic people destroy themselves. My parents always said these neighborhoods had too many rules and were too strict. But when I saw my dream house for a great price, I couldn't say no. I had spent 8 years working as a software developer to buy my dream car, a Nissan GTR, and this house had a beautiful 2-car garage to keep it safe. I thought it would be perfect. That was until I met the Homeowners Association board member who lived 3 houses down from me. From day one, he had an issue with my car. I think he was used to being the big shot in the neighborhood with his Mercedes-Benz, and my GTR somehow threatened his ego. It started with passive-aggressive notes left on my windshield about excessive noise. Then came the formal complaints to the Homeowners Association about me revving my engine and disturbing the peace. I tried explaining to him multiple times that GTRs naturally have a louder engine, and I wasn't doing anything to make it louder. One day, he confronted me in my driveway as I was leaving for work. He started yelling about how I needed to stop revving my monstrosity every morning because people were trying to sleep. I explained again that I wasn't revving the engine, that this was just how the car naturally sounded. He accused me of lying and bragged about his 15 years on the board, threatening that he wouldn't let some young show-off ruin the neighborhood's peace and quiet. I tried to reason with him, explaining that I understood his concern but that my car was completely stock and legal. He threatened that he'd make sure I either silenced the car or got rid of it. In frustration, I told him to do whatever he thought he needed to do. Those words would come back to haunt me because he took them as a challenge. The harassment escalated. He started taking videos of my car every time I left or came home, trying to document the noise violations. He would stand in his driveway and glare at me whenever I drove past. He even tried to get other neighbors to sign a petition to ban modified vehicles from the neighborhood, but most of them didn't care enough to get involved. Then one morning I went to my garage to head to work and my car was gone. At first I thought I was losing my mind. I checked my security camera footage and couldn't believe what I saw. At 2 a.m., the board member and another man in overalls had broken into my garage. The man in overalls, who I later found out was a mechanic from a shady shop across town, managed to start my car without the key, and they drove off with it. I immediately called the police and showed them the footage. They were as shocked as I was that a homeowners association board member would go this far. The officer told me this was way beyond a neighborhood dispute, where it was grand theft auto. When I pointed out that I had everything on camera with their faces clearly visible, he assured me they would track them down right away. The police found my GTR at the mechanic's shop where the board member had paid to have it stored until I learned my lesson. When they arrested him at his house, he was still trying to act like he was in the right. He kept shouting that he was doing the neighborhood a favor and that my car was a nuisance. When the officer told him he was under arrest for breaking and entering, grand theft auto and conspiracy to commit theft, he couldn't believe it. He kept protesting that they couldn't arrest him because he was on the Homeowners Association board. I couldn't help but point out that they could and they were, and maybe he'd learned something about respecting other people's property in prison. The investigation revealed that the board member had been planning this for weeks. He had approached several mechanics before finding one willing to help him steal my car. He had even written in his notes about how he would teach me a lesson about defying the Homeowners Association. Both he and the mechanic were charged. The board member got 3 years in prison for orchestrating the whole thing, while the mechanic got 18 months for his role. My car was returned to me undamaged, and the Homeowners Association had to do damage control. They immediately removed him from the board and issued a formal apology to me. The new board actually amended the bylaws to prevent harassment of residents over vehicle noise unless it violates city ordinances. My GTR's natural engine sound is well within those limits. Now when I drive through the neighborhood, I occasionally catch glimpses of the board member's wife glaring at me from their front window. Their Mercedes sits in their driveway, collecting dust while he serves his time. Sometimes I think about how all of this could have been avoided if he had just accepted that not everything in the neighborhood needed to be under his control. But I won't lie, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that his attempt to assert his authority not only failed spectacularly, but cost him his freedom, his reputation, and his position of power. All because he couldn't handle the sound of a stock GTR driving past his house twice a day. Back when I served as a healthcare officer in the military, I had a pretty good setup going. The pay wasn't great compared to civilian healthcare, but we were allowed to work in private practices during our off days to supplement our income. Most officers did this, including our commanders, and it was completely above board as long as you followed the proper procedures. I had been doing this for a while without any issues until we got this new first sergeant. This guy had some kind of chip on his shoulder when it came to officers. You could tell he took pleasure in making things difficult for us whenever he could. I lived about an hour away from my assigned base because I had previously been stationed at another base closer to home. When I got transferred, I decided to keep my family where they were and just make the commute. I also worked at a private practice near my house on my days off. One day, I submitted a leave request for a day I was scheduled to work at the private practice. The first sergeant denied it over some minor technicality. I think I submitted it a day late or something equally trivial. I wasn't about to let him mess with my schedule, though. I went through our sick call policy with a fine-tooth comb. Officers had pretty relaxed rules. We didn't need to report to sick call or provide a doctor's note unless we were sick for 3 or more days. This was standard practice, and every other officer in the unit followed the same procedure. When my scheduled day came around, I called in sick. I told the first sergeant I wasn't feeling well and wouldn't be coming in. He immediately demanded that I report to sick call and get a doctor's note. I asked him to show me where in the policy this was required, reminding him that officers only needed documentation for absences of 3 days or more. He insisted that this was how things were done here, and that I needed a note. I questioned whether this had been required of other officers. This back and forth continued all morning while I was seeing patients at my private practice. Finally, he pulled rank and told me that the commander had ordered me to get a note, so I had to comply. Well, there was no arguing with a direct order from the commander. But if they wanted a note, I'd give them one, my way. During my lunch break, I headed to the emergency room at the base near my house. By the time I walked in, I had worked myself up into quite a performance. When the receptionist asked what brought me in, I complained about throwing up all morning and not being able to keep anything down. The nurse looked me over and commented that I didn't look well at all. The doctor saw me quickly and diagnosed me with a stomach virus. When he asked why I'd come in for something so minor, I explained that the commander had required a note. He seemed annoyed by this common military bureaucracy, but decided to give me an IV since I'd supposedly been throwing up. They hooked me up to an IV, and I spent the next 20 minutes catching up on emails. When lunch was almost over and the bag was only half empty, I unhooked it, emptied the rest in the sink, and hooked it back up. The nurse came in, saw the empty bag, and gave me my note before sending me on my way. I made it back to my private practice in plenty of time for my afternoon patients, well hydrated and with a legitimate doctor's note in hand. The first sergeant couldn't say a word when I handed it in the next day. After all, I had followed his instructions to the letter. The commander never questioned my sick days again, and the first sergeant seemed to find other ways to occupy his time that didn't involve hassling officers about their time off. Let me tell you about something that happened to me last week. I've been living in this small neighborhood for about 5 years now, and there's a Walgreens just down the street from my house. I go there so often that I pretty much know all the employees by now. We always chat about our days and share little jokes. It's just that kind of friendly neighborhood place. I even help them put things back on shelves sometimes when I see items in wrong places, just because it feels like the right thing to do in a place where everyone's so nice. So there I was, wearing my favorite red hoodie, just picking up some basic supplies, when this elderly man approached me. He looked really worried and distressed. He politely asked if I worked there, but even if I didn't, could I help him? I told him I'd be happy to help if I could. He explained that his wife was in the hospital and he needed to get some things for her but couldn't find them. He mentioned he wasn't good with all the new products they have nowadays. I couldn't just walk away. His hands were shaking as he held this little list his wife had written. We went through each item together, and honestly, he seemed like he really needed someone to talk to. He told me about his wife, how they'd been married for 52 years, and how this was her first time in the hospital since their daughter was born. She had fallen and broken her hip, and he was clearly worried sick about her. I spent about half an hour helping him find everything and just listening to his stories about their life together. That's when this woman came storming up to us. She had this look on her face like she'd been sucking on lemons, wearing an expensive-looking outfit, that somehow made her look even more uptight. She immediately started complaining about how long I'd taken to help him, asking if I couldn't see that she had been waiting. She was tapping her foot and gesturing wildly with a shopping basket that only had 2 items in it. I apologized and explained that I didn't actually work there and was simply trying to help. She sneered and said that since I was helping people, I must work there, her voice dripping with condescension. I tried to be nice about it, I really did. I even told her where she could find what she was looking for. Aisle 3, top shelf, right next to the vitamins. Then I headed to checkout because honestly, I just wanted to get home. I could hear her muttering under her breath as I walked away. But oh no, Karen wasn't done. She walked right up to the checkout counter where my friend, the cashier, was ringing up my stuff. Her heels were clicking aggressively against the floor as she walked. She demanded to speak to a manager right away, complaining that I had been an extremely unhelpful employee who spent all their time with just one customer while ignoring everyone else. She went on about how this generation has no work ethic and how she'd never seen such poor customer service. The cashier and the manager, who I've known for years, shared this look. You know the kind, when you're trying really hard not to laugh. The manager explained that I didn't work there and never had. Karen insisted that since I was helping customers, I must work there, getting louder with each word. The manager then suggested, with barely concealed amusement, that if it would make her feel better, they could definitely fire me right now. The cashier joined in, telling me to turn in my non-existent badge and uniform. I played along, wondering aloud what I would do without my imaginary paycheck and how I'd feed my imaginary work family. Karen just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Her face turned so red it almost matched my hoodie. She stammered something about unprofessional behavior and reporting this to corporate before storming out, leaving her shopping basket right there at the counter. We could hear her high heels clicking all the way to the parking lot. The old man, who was still there finishing up his own purchase, just commented that some people need to find something to be angry about. He shared that in his 5 decades of shopping, he'd never seen someone get so worked up about receiving help from a fellow customer. We all had a good laugh about it, and the manager even gave me a fake letter of recommendation for my next imaginary job, complete with a list of my imaginary accomplishments. So yeah, that's the story of how I got fired from a job I never had. The next time I came in, the employees had made me a former Employee of the Month paper certificate, complete with a little gold star sticker and a detailed description of my outstanding performance in my non-existent position. It's now proudly displayed on my fridge right next to my grocery list. The employees still joke about it whenever I come in, asking if I've found another imaginary job yet, or if I'm still collecting my pretend unemployment benefits. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.